rise above the static, dissecting issues diplomatic. With mics in hand, they brave the storm of clashing views and norms transform. The Pundits Podcast, bold and true, shining lights on red and blue. Through heated takes and reasoned thought, they seek the truth that can't be bought. From climate change to foreign ties, they pause the spinning and sift the lies. No stone unturned, no topic taboo, as left and right come into view.
Hey everybody, it's Razib here with conversation number 16, and I'm here with Josiah Neely as usual. And this is it's after the election. Donald Trump won. I think everyone who's listening probably knows that.
Legally, as they say.
Yeah. But people who do not know that probably are not listening. Which there are people who are trying not to find out, and so we'll see. Okay. It was I don't know. Josiah, let's just do a quick recap for like the people that have been sleeping. I don't know. I mean, in terms of the top lines, like what you saw, and it was I don't call it. It wasn't a landslide, but it was a substantial win. It wasn't close.
Yes. So I think the big takeaways, Trump, he won back all the states that he got in 2016 plus Nevada. He won the popular vote, which he had not done in 2016. The wins, if you look at the swing states, he won them all, not by overwhelming margins. It was usually by, 2 points, 3 points, something like that. The bigger, I think, significance of the election is not, you have to like zoom out from the swing states and look at Trump did really well in a bunch of non-swing places too. So, Harris won New Jersey, but only by 5 points, right? She won Illinois, but only by 5 points. New York City, I think Trump won a third of the vote there, which I think hasn't happened since the 80s, something like that. And if you look at demographically, Trump, I think, has done the best of any Republican candidate ever recorded with Hispanics, right? So, he did 45%, he got 45% of Hispanics according to the exit polls. The record, I believe, was George Bush in 2004 with 44%. And, there's an issue with the exit polls where traditionally they have tended to overstate Republican support for Hispanics and Asians because they undersample people who don't speak English, right? And traditionally, if you don't speak English, you're more likely to be voting Democrat. Actually, with Trump, I'm not sure that that's even true because there's a lot of Spanish language media that's very pro-Trump. And, I know some of the other groups like Chinese immigrants or whatever, like they just, they haven't assimilated, like they're, if you speak English, you're like watching, MSNBC or whatnot. But if you don't speak English, like all you care about is like affirmative, education, crime, other things. So it's probable that Trump may even have done better than 45%. Anyway, so he did really well. And, that I think has implications, not just for this election. Trump is never going to run again for anything, but for just like the future direction of the Republican Party, and for the future direction of the Democrat Party, right? Because for the last 10 years, Democrats have had this theory that changing racial composition of the U.S. was just going to make them inevitable winners forever, like this is the emerging Democratic
majority. Yeah, let me just take over here. That I think the emerging Democratic majority, the original book by Judas and they've
repudiated it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what really happened is which like I think maybe a little bit of like I don't know, like revisionism, but basically, I mean, both. So it was in February. It was in 2004.
Right.
I think the paperback was in 2004, so the hardcover was earlier. Yeah, so this book basically was a combination of taking the Democrats' working class base, and people have to remember that in the '90s, Bill Clinton won West Virginia. This working class base, white working class in the South. Andrew Gelman, political scientist Andrew Gelman, used to show this chart with like income and voting Democrat or Republican, and in the South, if you're white, there's like a linear relationship. Yes, I mean there were still white Democrats. There were still people who were voting Democrat in the South about a generation ago. They tended to be poorer people, working class people. Well, a lot of those class correlations, I think, have been scrambled, and as we all know, the working class, white working class, has been shifting towards Trump, shifting towards the Republicans, but really under Trump, really, really shifting. And what's been happening is now the non-white working class is also shifting towards Trump, right? And so the emerging Democratic majority was actually predicated on a certain understanding of a New Deal coalition and extending that New Deal coalition with racial minorities who are naturally, quote unquote, going to be like, they're natural Democrats, natural Republicans. These are things people say, but there's nothing natural about being a member of a political party. Actually, there's just situations and random things that happen. And, I think the issue is 2008 with Obama's big victory. He won North Carolina. He won Indiana. He really extended the map. He kept Florida for both of his elections. It looked like it was coming together because Obama pulled a lot of black voters. He also pulled a lot of Asian voters, a lot of immigrants. I think,
Right.
I mean, honestly, okay, he's obviously a great political talent, but also, he's a third culture kid background. In a way, he could be all things to all people. So he was the black candidate, but he was also the wine track candidate. And also he lived in Indonesia and he has, half Asian sister. So, there was a lot of things going on there that I think were not replicable. So that didn't happen. And now what we're seeing is, what David Shore has been talking about, like I think as early as 2016, racial depolarization. Racial polarization in voting in presidential elections peaked in 2012. And they're depolarizing, and that's scrambling expectations. And finally, I do have to say, if you read some Republicans, just like name check, like Peter Brimlow, who I don't have a problem with Peter. This is not a diss, but if you read some of the stuff that he wrote in National Review before he was purged, basically with the demographics that we have today, there should be no Republican victories. It should be a permanent minority party, right? So, the pessimism goes on both sides.
Yeah, and I will say, I think the issue with a lot of this stuff is people they treat the parties as kind of static, right? So if you were to look, the country has moved left on all sorts of issues from 2004, right? If you look at from the perspective of 2004, it's hard to think of very many issues where the country has moved right, actually. Maybe like guns, but
Immigration.
Well, even immigration, I don't know.
I think the median has moved, but it's gone bimodal.
Yeah, right.
So I would describe the distribution more towards the center, but you had a Bush Republican Party and you had a Democratic Republican Party. The Democratic Party was not as open borders as some factions are on the left now.
Right.
But I still think like the Republican Party in particular was dominated by basically a high immigration wing. And now both parties have the Republican Party is totally anti-immigration, I would say. And the Democratic Party still has moderates that want to close down. So that's what I would say. Just
Yeah. But I do think, some of that, if the chaos that we've seen at the border and like the millions of asylum seekers and all of that, if that had happened in 2004, I don't know who would be president, right? Maybe. So in that sense, like, I think what people forget about is that the parties change and adapt to a changing demographic, right? So in one sense, the emerging Democratic majority is kind of right in that we're now a country, both the parties except gay marriage and all the stuff that Republicans might have wanted to do in terms of like privatizing Social Security, say, or like other fiscal austerity, right? That's kind of off the table. They moderated a little bit on abortion, all sorts of stuff, right? But what people forget is, but that doesn't mean, so the country's gotten more liberal. It's moved to the left. But that doesn't mean necessarily that Republicans lose more, right? Because the parties shift and sometimes they swap positions. Like, on some foreign policy stuff, the parties basically have switched positions from 20 years ago in terms of like.
Well, yeah, 2000, the inversions of 2004 with the chicken hawk. Well, I mean, that's why Cheney endorsed. I mean, that's weird.
Yeah,
I mean, people, I think only like a few, kind of like, labor left anti-war type people really made as big of a deal about it as they should have.
right.
Because like, just imagine, because we remember 2004,
Yeah,
and it's just like the idea of Dick Cheney endorsing a liberal Democrat
right.
20 years later, like what happened in the world?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a little bit like
Dick Cheney is endorsing the Democrat while RFK Jr. is for the Republican. Like that's kind of weird.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this. I mean, in some ways, Trump, people like Matt Iglesias have talked about this. In some ways, when it comes to positions, and Trump is not like a hyper position driven candidate, except for a few things, is he has like de facto shifted to the middle, right? He's a moderate.
Yeah, he's always been, I think, a kind of moderate guy on most stuff, and even things. I think one mistake that people think about is when they think about moderates, they think about someone who is kind of like I don't know, like Mark Zuckerberg, like who's the guy who runs Starbucks, like Howard Schultz or something. I apologize.
Yeah. He's a former CEO and founder. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, they think about someone who's like actually fiscally conservative, socially liberal. Okay. And the reality is like moderate voters or you just kind of split the difference on all sorts of issues. Whereas the reality is moderate voters actually have extreme opinions on some issues. They just don't line up, so like a moderate voter is like, could be someone who thinks, well, I support, government sponsored healthcare, but also we should like kill all the pedophiles and like kick all the illegals out of the country or something, so that's and Trump, I feel, is a true moderate in that sense, that like his instincts are always towards that sort of thing, like tough on crime, tough on the border, but also like, I mean, he's a businessman. He likes low taxes or whatever, but he doesn't want, as he famously said in one of the Republican debates, we don't want people dying on the streets, because they can't get health care or whatever. Right. So yeah,
that's just a normal.
Right. Yeah. It's like a normal person reaction. Yeah. Right. But, politics is full of not normal people. So when a normal person actually shows up, like everybody, kind of reacts oddly. So, that's the situation. Obviously, whenever a party loses an election, it's time for like recriminations and blame. And so we've seen a lot of that, and also some attempts of like, how do you need to redirect, right? So I think we have seen some glimmers of that. There's some people I know, Matt Iglesias, others have been talking about like how what do the Democrats need to do to kind of stop alienating voters, right?
All right. I guess say like I listened to the politics podcast that Iglesias does with Brian Beutler or Butler. I don't know how you say it. Did you listen to that?
I didn't know.
I mean, Matt's like Matt Iglesias. He's like normal. I think like Beutler was like, we need to stop media disinformation, otherwise we would have won. And I was like, I think Iglesias was actually like pretty calm, considering I think he was like this is insane. You know, like
Right. Yeah.
just cut it out.
Yeah.
Because Boiler kept trying to like go back to like, well, actually, people would have voted if they knew.
They knew. Right. This is, I think,
And
yeah.
yeah,
I actually do think this is a big story. This is a big story in the election, although I would not put it in that terms. Yeah, I mean, I saw a lot of coverage on like MSNBC, CNN, other things like that, where people said, "Well, I don't like don't people know that the economy is actually great? We told them that, and they don't believe us. We told them that Trump is a fascist, and they don't believe us about that." So I do think a big story in this election is just falling trust in the media. And, in the past, the media had like a lot more power to like shape public perceptions, and they don't
yeah.
have anymore. And,
Mhm.
uh,
Well, okay. Just as a random like
yeah,
parenthetical or like not related to like our so I am with so I mentioned Deep News last week. Just check it out with the Z. But I'm actually writing an op-ed with co-founder or the founder CEO Nikolai about how AI can help us a little bit. Um, it's just the issue with the media. Right? So we grew up of an age like when we were young where there was a view for nowhere. And I think a lot of us, I don't know about you, I was a little like, okay, I was open to the idea, like, people should be more transparent and just like be honest about, like, we know that you actually have these views, right?
yeah,
That hasn't worked out. Instead, what's happened is like, it's kind of amped up the bidding of like ideological news. And at this point, like, I subscribe to like a bunch of things. I know you do too. And it's just like on any given story, especially if you don't know it well, it's just like you have to read a bunch of different things because like they're just like presenting these like slanted views all the time. And I think we need to figure out a way. I mean, because the publications aren't, I think, AI and like technology and other things actually, they fundamentally do have to help. Like, blogs initially were about fact checking and just going straight to the data. Um, you know, just this information economy, we're still adjusting. And the media, it's easy to hate on it because there are reasons to hate on it, but they're trying to adjust too. And I think that we need to understand that like there was kind of a status quo for say the 20th century, and that status quo was underwritten by a technological status quo,
yeah,
which is changing every few, because we went through the blog era, social media era. Now there's like, AI, Google, no, I mean, candidly, Google quote no longer works. Everyone knows what that means. Like in terms of the search results are a lot less. Anyway, I think like that's the reason that the misinformation, disinformation stuff has some traction at least, because on some level people know there's something wrong. It's just not, the impact is not necessarily what they're thinking,
right. I mean, I do think I don't. I think the terms misinformation and disinformation have kind of been ruined because they basically, the way they get deployed is, you don't believe what we, the like elite people, have decreed as the truth, which may or may not actually be the truth, and so that's a problem, and so we need to like shut other people up. I mean, it is just the case. I don't think anybody could disagree that like people believe a lot of stupid shit, right? And there's a lot of like fake stuff out there from official and unofficial sources. And that could be like I don't think that's actually new. Maybe it's getting worse. It could be it could be a problem, but certainly I don't think like I'm skeptical of like censorship. Certainly not censorship by like CNN or the New York Times or MIT or whatever. Um,
Well, okay. I will say that we don't have to ever talk about this guy again. In that debate with JD, Tim Walz questioned whether the First Amendment applied to misinformation.
right.
How retarded are you to say that? I don't know.
Well,
Just
I
like,
mean, it's not just him, right? John Kerry said, First Amendment is an obstacle, like to combating disinformation. We need to like get enough votes to change it. On The View, they basically said, the Trump won the election because there's not enough regulation of social media. And like on one level, I think they might be right. Like I think if we were still operating under the old, like if instead of X we still had Twitter and that old regime, would the election have gone the same way? I'm not I'm not convinced that it would. So I do think like they're kind of onto something, but I think it's evil in terms of, they want to maintain control over the narrative, which I mean, they've lost control with most people. Most people don't believe them. And it's kind of a vicious cycle. As you said, 20 years ago, like reporters had to at least pretend that they didn't care who won, right? In the sense that like they weren't going to be skewing their coverage deliberately to try and help Kerry or the Democrats against Bush or the Republicans. And now it's just like out there every day they talk about, well, like what can we do in order to make the Republicans lose, and if the Republicans ever win, that's a failure on us as journalists. And of course, obviously no one's going to believe them unless you're like a really hardcore liberal or Democrat, or you're just like watching MSNBC 6, 7, 8 hours a day. So yeah, I don't. I mean, I think it's hopeless for them. Basically, there have been some. Bezos, I think, wants to try and do something with the Washington Post to change it. That's why they didn't endorse. He had an op-ed about that. There's some other people that are trying to do stuff like that. Ultimately, I think it's probably doomed to failure at this point. And that's not. To some extent, I do think you mentioned 20th century. In the 19th century, there wasn't really any nonpartisan media, right? Like everything was explicitly, even today, a lot of newspapers, if you look at it, it's like the Milwaukee Democrat Reporter or whatever. It's like, well, why is Democrat in the names? Because it was the Democrat paper, and there's like the Chicago Republican Times. I don't know. I'm making these names up, but the media was all pretty partisan and fractured, and television and radio are kind of like very concentrated media, for technical reasons. And so you kind of like siloed down to a few official voices. The internet, but print was not like that. The internet is not like that. Social media is not like that. So I think that's just the world you're going to have to live in, for better or worse.
Yeah, it's a new world. I want to go back because I like put a note in our notes like the racial reckoning, because
Yes.
2020 was the racial reckoning supposedly by the media, but in some ways, I think 2024, as we've alluded to, is like the real racial reckoning insofar as it's not playing out. The way the racial reckoning of 2020 and the woke, the liberal intelligentsia, the way they defined it is there's white people, evil white people, especially white men,
Right.
and there's like oppressed people, there's BIPOC people, so it's kind of like the progressive stack rank, where the most intersectionally most oppressed people are at the top, and all of this stuff. And I think part of the issue here is it's a very college educated professional managerial class way of looking at the world,
Yeah.
and a lot of working class people of all races are just sick of it. I think obviously, white working class changed first, probably because there's more conservative, they're more open to the Republican Party. But obviously, we saw a big change with the Latinx people. In terms of where they're voting, and there's also even a shift with Asians who of late have been tilting to the Democrats and the professional managerial class.
Right.
I think part of it is the Republican Party is still the white Christian party, but there's enough people involved in it that it just makes the optics like less clear now. And I think that's all that a lot of people actually needed. There's just clearly Asians there are clearly Asians and Latinos who on paper should have been voting for the Republicans. But, there was kind of like a racial fear history there because the Republicans are the racist party. I'm going to, I'll do quotes, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would call it maybe the racial reckoning, in that 4 years ago we had the so-called racial reckoning, and it's like elite institutions, the Democrats, liberals, the media, is like they took all sorts of crazy positions on race, identity, discrimination. America is systemically racist country, institutionally racist country, and all sorts of other stuff like that. And it turns out, like it gets annoying, right? Like people don't like it. Even even like non-white people don't particularly like it, And in this, there have been some attempts to try and like push Democrats away from that, but then the other inclination within the Democrat Party and the liberal media that I've seen is just kind of like double down on it. So like Kamala Harris lost. Well, obviously it's because voters were sexist and or racist, right? Because she's a woman and she's like half black, half Asian, or however you want to describe that. And and certainly even during the campaign, like you could see towards the end of the campaign, there was a lot of focus on like one, if men are not supporting Kamala Harris, it's because she's a woman and you don't want to vote for a woman. And if you're a woman, you should vote for Kamala Harris because she's a woman and you're a woman, right? It's just like that sort of hectoring, kind of double standard. People didn't like it. And I think a lot of people also, like my big worry, I'll tell you this, like a year ago, and then when it started to seem like Biden was going to fade out or flame out, I'll tell you, my big worry was that they were going to replace him with Michelle Obama, right? Either have her be the candidate or Biden pick her as replace Harris and have her be the new VP with like the understanding that he would like, if he won, he would be president for 18 months to let her get settled and then he would step down, she'd be president, right? That's someone who I think like in polling, focus groups that I've seen everything, like people would have really vibe with that. And there are other like Oprah, I've always thought like Oprah is the left wing Trump, so it's not that there aren't like black women who the electorate would support, in my opinion, right? The reality is that until June of 2024, everybody kind of like, it was kind of conventional wisdom that Kamala Harris was kind of a doofus, right? She was not, she was kind of a joke.
Well, it's not. It wasn't abstract because she ran and she didn't do very well.
Yeah, right. She ran in 2019. She didn't do very well, and like her time as VP, I mean, people compared her to like that Julia Louis-Dreyfus character.
Yeah, that's TV show. Yeah,
and then suddenly she becomes the nominee, and then suddenly it's like, well, if you don't support her, it can only be because of race or sexism. People just get tired of that. So, yeah, hopefully there can be like kind of a positive virtue loop. If the parties become racially depolarized, then the Democrats feel like, well, like trying to pump up the salience on race and racism is not actually going to work for us.
Yeah.
And then it'll, feed.
Well,
yeah.
Let's like remind people, because people have short memories, like in 2012, Mitt Romney, who I think in 2024 we can all agree is not racist. I mean, the only reason he's racist is because, some pundits don't like the fact that he has a adopted black grandchild or something like that. That's the only reason that I've seen right now, right? But like Joe Biden said, y'all going to be back in the chains. It's like, come on, man, as Joe Biden would say, right. Come on, man, but so, I mean, this sort of stuff is, once it is depolarized, and we're already seeing, I don't know if these social media accounts are real because I don't follow all of these, but I think they're saying it ironically, but it's just like, they're talking about like how the people that voted for Trump are going to get deported and stuff like that, kind of gleefully or, sarcastically. And it's just like,
if you're subject to deportation, you should not be voting.
Yeah. So it's like the whole thing is very confused. And it's just like, but I mean, you saw this in 2008, actually. Remember when, California, it was, to a great extent with black voters, they repealed the gay marriage. Yes. And, a gay marriage, statute or whatever. And, there's some gay pundits who were kind of racist. They kind of said a few racist things, which just shows that, like, when the mask comes off, sometimes it's not always what the words don't always align with behavior of the inner, which is, it's fine. And everyone, hypocrisy is normal, and people try to strive to be better. So I'm not like holding it against them that way, but the reactions are a little raw right now. Sure. Yeah. So I think I think I think the fundamental issue here is just in a general, like, sociological or cultural narrative. We as Americans got super obsessed. I think it was partly a bit astroturf with Tides Foundation and other things, but got obsessed with race right as it was on the precipice of losing its saliency.
Yes. Right.
So it's like the polls were showing throughout the teens that like race relations were getting worse and worse and worse and all this stuff. And look, I mean, yeah, I've lived in Austin, lived in California, since 2010. Like, go to the Pacific Northwest where my family is a lot. I'm in New York right now, actually, and I travel for work and visiting friends, and this is just not a racist country. You don't like encounter that day to day. Maybe, I mean, also like I'm gonna be honest, like some people they just see things because they want to see it.
Yes.
Like I mean, yeah, go on.
Like education, modern elite education, so much of it is about trying to find problematic aspects of different things, right? So if you go through that and if you have the right disposition, temperament, ideology, yeah, you're just like your sensors are just tuned way up, where if you like McDonald's, that's racism, that's white supremacy. If you don't like McDonald's, that's white supremacy, that's racism, and just like everything. So normal people are not like that. I think we talked about this last time with the Puerto Rico thing, where people were like, oh no, Trump is going to alienate Hispanics because some comedian at a rally made a joke about Puerto Rico. Well, that didn't happen. Okay. So, oops, just next time because the next time Trump or somebody says something like that and there's a big media freak out on the left, I hope people remember this and it would be like, well, wait, maybe people are just being a little oversensitive, like maybe actually, if you actually talk to people, like I saw a video a little while ago, and it was it's a white guy, and he was wearing like a giant sombrero, and he had the like whole like classic Mexican outfit, and he went to like some college campus, and was asking people like, do you think this is offensive? And they're all like, yeah, this is racist. This is bad. This is cultural appropriation. And then he went to like, I don't know, some heavily Hispanic area, like a border town or whatnot. And everyone there is like, no, it's fine. Actually, it looks good. It looks cool. I'm glad that you're like, wearing this. It's like pride in our culture or whatnot. So that's, I think, kind of the difference in attitude between like the PMC liberal elite and how they view these things, and how like normal people, normal Hispanic, Black, Asian, whoever people view them, right? Which is much more chill and reasonable in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, so I think we should probably, I did put the notes for the you know, racial stuff, but also gender didn't pan out quite as much in terms of the polarization either. Yeah. So, I think you alluded to this in the beginning. Basically, you saw like a general shift towards Trump. He's going to win the popular vote moderately. It's a general across, but Claire Lehman wrote a piece in Quillette, and it's pretty good. I mean, a lot of it is, I think we're seeing the return of it's okay to be a guy. So one of the problems with the Democratic Party, candidly, is a lot of young men are turned off by all this talk about toxic masculinity and and stuff like that. And like somebody on social media was saying, well, how can Democrats win white males? Or and Matt Iglesias says, how about giving them the same protections from being insulted that other groups get? And what he's alluding to is like liberal Democrats insult white males constantly and insult males like a little less. And when you're insulted all the time, I guess there are some males that are like, oh, you know what? Like I'm more virtuous because
right.
I'm accepting my evilness, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like if you're like an evangelical Christian and you just like, everyone's a sinner. Like that's, yes, we get it, but you don't shut up about it. it starts to get annoying. You
Right.
know, like, I'm a sinner, I do this, I'm a sinner, and it's like there's some people that are like that, right? So there are people like that, but like most people just don't want to deal with that all the time. You want to be a normal person. And so I think yeah, Trump is crass. A lot of his jokes, I mean, don't know. I mean, even the women that voted for him, a lot of them still don't really like his affect. Okay. But there is a limit on him. So I think what's going on in our culture to some extent is there's not an explicit acknowledgement that a lot of the politeness and political correctness culture that has come to dominate, like through HR and other things, is to a great extent the culture of white women, is what I'm
Mhm.
going to say.
Right.
But it's not like explicitly stated that way. But on some level, a lot of people, they feel that something is like off with this. Like this is, and the vote, that the younger white men in particular have shifted towards the Republicans, publicly. Rogan endorsed, he's not super young anymore, but, our generation, he's Gen X. But I mean, he endorsed Trump, Elon, other people, these kind of like tech guys. They're not church ladies, they're not like Christian coalition people. But they're, I guess, like, what is it? The barstool conservative type. Yeah, yeah. And that's a real thing. I think we need to talk about it a little, or just like acknowledge that that's a thing. It's this sex divide that's emerged partly because the Democratic Party in particular, I feel, has just kind of like started espousing views that are much more comfortable and comforting to women, but kind of like men are not always comfortable with that. The Republican Party is just by reaction, I think, also doing that. When the Christian evangelical faction was dominant, though, that was dampened because just like Christian values dampen kind of like the masculine energy there. Trump, I mean, look, you can't look inside of a guy's heart, but like, some Christian said, he is he is our most pagan president. And I think that that's getting at something real, in terms of like, I don't think he's like a scientific material. He's not like a, he's not a Richard Dawkins type person, I don't think. But I think the religious views that he has, um, are very raw and kind of instinctive, I mean, he probably does believe that there's divine providence, but more like in maybe a Greco-Roman way than a Christian way, is
Uh,
what I'm saying.
yeah, 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 or like civic Christianity or something. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I saw a tweet. I've seen several tweets like this, but in particular, one tweet that was saying, you know, the left needs its own Joe Rogan, and the left needs its own Elon Musk if we're gonna like win back these like the bros or whatnot. And someone pointed out in the replies to this tweet, someone's like, well, actually Rogan and Elon were both Democrats until like a few years ago, right? So yeah, and of course this guy was like, oh well, it's good that we don't have Elon anymore because he's a fascist, right? So it's like you can't even. Okay, fine, but yeah, like this demographic, like there are a lot of these people who like Elon was a Democrat, Rogan was a Democrat. They still probably have liberal views on like a lot of stuff. I mean, Rogan, I think, had always talked about how he liked Bernie, and Elon, like what is his big thing was like electric cars, right? To deal with climate change. So these are not, I don't think they're ungettable people, but yeah, both the just like generalized hostility and just a kind of a more like a mindset which is not as appealing to people in the way like even just like framing
Mm.
issues and stuff, so
Well, okay. I will say one thing. Uh, like, again, Iglesias has talked about that. I mean, he's been pretty good about, I think, diagnosing what's going on in the early Biden administration. Wait, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say I sort of feel bad for Matt Iglesias because I've been watching him throughout this campaign, and it was very clear, like on the one hand he really wanted the Democrats to win, right? He wasn't ambivalent about it. Like he really like on a very like deep emotional level wanted them to win. And he also, I think correctly, had a read that like the way to win was to do like the opposite of what the Democrats were doing. And so he would just like tweet, like he tweeted all sorts of stuff, about like well, Trump is going to cut Social Security or Medicaid care, or like, he's going to ban, abortion, and like Democrats should talk about nuclear power because like guys like nuclear power, and also, and basically nobody listened to him. And so it must have been like a very frustrating experience to be like, I really want the Democrats to win. I think I know how they can win. And they're not listening to me. They're doing the exact
Well, arguably, a Trump win is good for slow boring. It's good for Matt Iglesias.
Yes, right. He's being altruistic in the sense of like, I don't,
What are you talking about?
on his bottom line, yeah, it probably is good for him.
Because he started slow boring. Well, I mean, was it right before the election? I think, yeah, in the 2020. I know
Yeah, I mean,
it was a little earlier.
left Vox during like summer of 2020, and I think he started the Substack almost immediately. So,
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I know he started. I mean, a little before me. I kind of got motivated to start my Substack, the main one or the other one. Okay, so I want to talk about something else.
yes,
I mean, there's a lot going on, but I want to talk about something else that's not in the notes. Because I tweeted it out. And I just want to like point this out. So, the pro life movement has had some successes now. Of the 10 measures, 3 of them, well, they either held or yeah. So Nebraska, South Dakota, they had success. I mean, that's fine. That makes sense. Those are like legitimately socially conservative states. I did point out something on Florida. It was Twitter, so I don't think I like got across what I was saying here. So the measure, which was a quite liberal abortion rights measure, probably, I mean, more liberal than the people wanted, but it got 57% of the vote. It had to get 60% to pass a constitutional muster. DeSantis campaigned against it, and the legislature campaigned against it. What I was trying to say, and like when Dobbs happened, and in fact, like I have looked at this for a long time. There are states that are kind of out of sync with the
right.
cultural ethos of the parties that rule them a lot. So, I mean, arguably West Virginia was like that until it became Republican recently, where it's like, the party was more liberal culturally because they're Democrat. And then the populace kind of swung, right? The thing with Florida is, and this goes back to, I think, like Governor Martinez in the 90s, the party has been very socially conservative. It was a purple state for a long time. Now, under Trump, it's become a red state. And I mean, a lot of the people, yeah, I mean, there's like new MAGA people in, but a lot of people, they came up in like, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And the issue here is like, I just don't know like how sustainable it is for Republicans to basically de facto. I mean, the 6-week abortion ban is basically a de facto abortion ban in some ways. To continue to do this because it is like of the Republican states, Florida is on the more pro-choice side. Like maybe not as much as Alaska, but like it's on that side as opposed to say Mississippi and Alabama, where the parties are in line with the populace. And so I was just trying to get across that because the Democrats have this problem where, they have like Tester, who just got, he lost his seat in Montana, Democrat, and they're culturally out of line. And it's always like a tough thing how they negotiate their reelection and all these things. And they kind of like posture certain ways. But Republicans could do the same thing. Before it didn't matter.
Right.
Like before, honestly, their just position on abortion didn't matter because of Roe v. Wade. And I just think that the people need to like think about this in terms of what might happen. Because right now people are like treating Florida as if, oh, it's like a red state like Texas, like we're going to like permanently have it. And I'm just like, it was a purple state. Like Obama won it twice. Like these sorts of things can change very fast. Anyway, because I know you've given some thought to this issue, maybe not as much as Ramesh Panuru, but
yeah, and I try to separate my analysis on the political analysis from my own views. I'm like very anti-abortion myself, so I'm happy that the amendment did not pass. I think, I was actually a little surprised with Florida for passing the 6 weeks ban, which they did after they passed it after Dobbs, so like a lot of states where abortion is banned now, the laws banning it were passed while Roe was still in effect, so they didn't actually have to take a tough vote. Florida, I think it had like a 15-week ban or 12-week ban, something like that. So, which was probably more in line with the public opinion on the subject. But they DeSantis, they passed a 6-week ban, and then he had an election, in 22, like after they did that, and he won big, and they won big again this year in Florida. So I think it is true that there are some headwinds created on the abortion issue. However, it's hard for me to think of any candidate who has lost because post Dobbs because of abortion, right? I'm not saying it couldn't happen. I'm not, but like there certainly is not obvious. It's like surmountable, right? It's surmountable. Like there's a small group of people who are very passionate about it. Most of them are passionate Democrats anyway, so you're not losing their votes. So you do lose. I mean, you probably do lose some votes at the margin, but it seems like it's actually not a big effect, right? It's because Kamala really hit that issue hard. Other people have really tried to make hay out of it, and while people do care about it, I think like ultimately it's less important to them than economy, jobs, the border, crime. So I think
Yeah.
so while it could matter in like a few like edge cases, I think it's actually probably sustainable, right? To have, just like the people of Florida are majority pro-choice, but Republicans are pro-life, and people will continue to vote in the Republicans for other reasons, and so the state will keep it that way, right? And that could be a sustainable thing, in a lot of different places. So I guess it will remain to be seen. Obviously the issue is not going away.
Well, let me let's pivot to crime, but before I do that, I just pulled up the map because it was updated this morning of abortion laws. Because, like I said, we had a bunch of Missouri overturned its ban,
Right.
but that will take a little while to play out in the courts. But it's interesting. I'm a little surprised, and I think you've mentioned this that Utah,
Yeah.
its ban is like 15 weeks. So basically, outside of Idaho in the West, there's no real ban.
Right.
Outside of Idaho, and then in the Northeast and Virginia, and like it's there's no bans, and then you have the Midwest, which is like kind of like broken up into different. I think like some of the state level measures, might have had an effect. Yeah, and so we'll see. So Idaho, yeah, so we'll see because there was like 7. I mean, a lot of the measures are kind of like symbolic, like oh yeah, Maryland, whatever, like Missouri, I think mattered
Missouri,
because yeah, yeah, and like Florida mattered,
right.
And the issue is like in Missouri, there's a smaller pro-choice majority than in Florida.
The measure won like 51-48 or something. I mean, it was
Yeah, it was close. It was close. So we'll see. We'll see. Like, I mean, there's still going to be like some states that probably like flip back and forth, but it's basically the whole Southeast is now like pro-life America.
right.
Kind of. It's what it looks like. The whole Southeast.
Like there's breaks. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's whereas like the North and the West are basically pro-choice now, and some of them or my home state of Oregon has pretty extreme law actually.
Sure. Yes.
It's like
some states are like, I mean, if the baby comes out, and it's still alive, you're like, well, you could still kill it or something, I guess.
If it's breech and the foot comes out, you can still kill the baby. But if it's the crowning on the head, no, you can't. It's like, I'm just joking.
Yeah.
But I mean, like the laws are like weird that way.
This is kind of crazy. There was a study in, I believe this was second term abortions in Quebec, right? And 10% of all the second term abortions in Quebec in the study, I believe this is accurate, but like 10% of them survived. you know? So like you're trying to do abortion and then the baby like slips all the way out and it's able to still live, like that's a crazy high percentage, Um,
hmm
uh,
I mean, that's why they know how to do it right in the United States. We don't need to get into it, but
yeah,
it's
I don't,
you know what I'm trying.
yeah,
Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah. Okay, like let's talk about something like a little like more cheery, like crime.
yeah, right, right.
We were talking about the racial reckoning earlier.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, basically, like 2020 is coming home to roost. Our friend Nate Hockman has
yeah,
defeated Gascon, the Soros attorney in LA. That means our friends in LA will no longer. Well, they can still get mugged and robbed, but there will be, penalties for that. So I think California overturned the measure that they had passed that if it's like less than $900, you basically couldn't get prosecuted or they wouldn't come after you.
yeah,
What that was doing, so there was basically like a norm, a law in California statute that if it's like less than $900 worth of goods, you could just steal. That's basically operationally what happened. And what was happening was it wasn't just random criminals; it was like gangs,
yeah.
of like
Yeah.
organized crime. Yeah, so they were stealing under the threshold. They kept coming under the threshold, and then they would resell. Right. And so this was actually and this was not even just. There were people who were outside of California organizing it and then putting on eBay. There was like a whole economy that emerged over this, and so my home state of Oregon is like going back on basically drug decriminalization.
Right.
And San Francisco has seen the new mayor is even more. I mean, London Breed went more moderate, but the new mayor, I think Dan Lurie, is even more moderate. And the moderates, Gary Tan's faction, have taken over to a great extent. The radicals are gone. So San Francisco is going, to the center. Oakland, the mayor and the DA, and like those of you who've listened to my other podcasts with Leighton Woodhouse would know all the details there. That with the pro-crime mayor, with the pro-crime DA, and the mayor who was like clueless, they're gone. Seneca Scott's recall efforts worked. So Oakland will see some reforms. Basically, this is a situation where you know, we said so, we told you so, but people actually had to get robbed, murdered, and mugged
Right.
to realize that you need laws and you need police. Unfortunately,
Yes.
so
I
that's
mean,
good. That's
yeah,
good, I guess.
this is one of a series of things that in 2020 people decided, and about there, but in 2020 people decided, let's do these bold liberal experiments, not enforce like not prosecute crime, don't just let people in at the border, get rid of standardized testing. And now after a couple years of it, people are kind of like, okay, you know what, let's roll it back a bit. So that's good. A lot of uh so our mutual friend Charles Lehman, he had an article that he wrote a couple months ago about social disorder, right? Because I think a lot of stuff, people care about crime, right? They don't want to be robbed, they don't want to be shot, they don't want to be raped. But in addition to that, one of the things that I think really does bother people is like social disorder, some of which is criminal, but some of which is not even criminal, but it's something that like the police do is, police and like maintain, of just like, random drunk or mentally ill person yelling at you on the street, or a guy who's like, uh, just like a bunch of broken, boarded up, like the shops are all, the windows are broken and they're boarded up or whatever. That's something that like, that's the sort of stuff, or like someone smoking a joint or smoking crack, on a park bench, like while your kids are walking by. That's stuff that really bothers people, and I think that kind of also gets tied up. So hopefully, crime. I firmly am of the belief crime is a choice. Like you can have. I mean, if it like San Francisco could have the crime rate of El Salvador if they wanted to. Any place could do that. And I guess there's just, and historically there's kind of like a pendulum, because like crime gets bad, you're like, you know what,
Mm-hmm.
lock them all up, throw away the key. crime comes down, people forget. They're like, oh, we're being too harsh, Then they kind of loosen up, and then crime goes up. And so it's cyclical. So I think we're kind of on the downward part of that cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is, we were in our 40s, mid 40s, whatever, ish. We were in the last wave of people who are on the verge of adulthood that remember the 90s crime wave.
Right.
Because even the geriatric millennials, they were like teenagers, they're kind of like a little vague about that. And so they were already in the Giuliani era, or like already like the declining crime. And so, they wanted to try to experiment. Same thing with the tests. Want to try the experiment. They did it. The positive thing is, we only lost 4 years, 6 years, whatever, however you want to say it. The correction is happening. I think I'm happy about that. Like you're a policy guy, so maybe you have a lot more to say on this, I think. But so where we're at right now is Trump is president. Yeah. The Senate looks to be. Hope you enjoyed the podcast so far. To listen to the rest of it, please go to conversation.substack.com.
Two minds met on a summer's eve, each with truths they long believed. Words flowed like a winding stream as hours passed in deep debate. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. In listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. It's not about who's wrong or right, but understanding others' light. In civil discourse we can find ties that gently bind. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. As dawn broke soft on dewy grass, they smiled and shook hands at last. Two souls enriched by reason talk, united in respect. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. This folk song captures the essence of a long, thoughtful discussion between two public intellectuals. It emphasizes the power of patient listening, mutual respect, and the discovery of common ground. The gentle tone reflects the calm and understanding they reach after their debate. band.